Mainlander's philosophy, that's Philip Mainlander, claims that God cannot fail at anything save for the creation of multiplicity, yet God desperately wants creation to continue. He claims, that's Mainlander, that the current world is a Manichaean battle between forces of light, pro-creation, pro-multiplicity, and forces of darkness, unifiers, pro-singularity. He wrote over a century ago, but his metaphysic is compelling because it is clear that the dark forces of unification are rapidly pushing towards a diabolical singularity. How may we fight this and help the party of life and plurality?
Well, I would like to know why he thinks those are the dark forces, and what is it that's dark about them? The fact that they...
Because, if you look at God as benevolent, then you have to view creation as something that is positive, and that plurality was created for a reason, not for no reason. And, essentially, even if you believe with certain Christian mystics, let's say the Orthodox mystics, that one's reality is reabsorbed into God, that reality is reabsorbed into God while maintaining one's individuality. Essentially, the entire ontological reason for the incarnation of Jesus and the death and resurrection was so that, mortal creatures who couldn't maintain immortality on their own could maintain immortality through the body of the Son. And essentially right now, that it's a unification that is a pro-plurality unification, whereas the dark forces that are at work now are the opposite. It's ostensibly on the surface plurality, but in reality, it's unifying everything into essentially an upside down inverse form of the Wahdatul Wujud. It's like an artificial intelligent machine reality, a matrix, if you will. And so for that reason, yes, it is diabolical. And when you think about it, a lot of the terms that I might use might seem similar, let's say, to the terms of the mystics, but that's always the case. You have Christ and Antichrist, you have God and devil. Always the force of evil is going to be described similarly in similar terms to the force of good, because it maintains many of the same characteristics, but in inverse.
Well, it to me, it seems that, in fact, all of the things that are described as being negative, in a sense, don't have any principle. They have no reality. It's merely an illusion. And so I don't see that the fact that many are deluded doesn't in any way subtract from the reality that they're deluded about. But at any rate, and even if you go to the level of beyond being, if you say, well, silence is a possibility of non-being, because it can't be beyond being, it can't be expressed as silence. But what it is in fact, when you look at it, or when you realize it, is that silence embodies the principle of all expression. So every possible expression is contained in that silence. So I don't see that anything is lost anywhere here. I can see that in people's view of things, they may have lost, but I don't see that the principle of anything, the principle of beauty, is not eliminated by ugliness, which has no principle. It's the lack of beauty. At any rate,
Thank you. I'm not sure I understand what's being said here. God creates multiplicity. Yes, that's creation. And multiplicity is being withdrawn into unity rather than continuing to be multiplicity.
all of those possibilities of multiplicity still are. They are.
And how does this tendency towards unity apply to people and animals? I'm showing my own ignorance here, but I really don't understand how things are tending towards unity.
Well, someone like the futurist philosopher Ray Kurzweil wants artificial intelligence to get to the point where it can be self-programming, such that it starts exponentially developing to the point that it almost becomes like a demigod. And then at that point, he wants humans to achieve immortality by uploading them into this artificial brain. And essentially, other than a few humans that would be, let's say, according to him, kept in zoos by the robot masters, that all people would have life only through the machine, and it would be this huge machine brain that creates an artificial universe, and all people would be living through that. And essentially, the entire planet would just simply be absorbed into this machine. And it's kind of a like, if you're familiar with Star Trek, kind of like a Borg kind of thinking. But this isn't sci-fi. This is something that Kurzweil and many people are very, very serious about. They no longer have a belief in any sort of religion or spirituality, but yet they don't want to die, because they believe at the death of the body that nothing continues. So they believe and are strongly fighting for immortality through the uploading of consciousness to servers, to the cloud, along with, radical machine implants and these sorts of things. And it's basically a kind of exoteric connection of everybody that is involved with that, such that it's a inverse corrupted version of the Jungian collective unconscious.
Well, it seems like to me that the people who think that they're going to do that think that way because they don't believe in any kind of, you might say, anything other than rational thought. And they think that by the expansion of rational thought indefinitely, that somehow or another they can make it divine. Well, I'm sorry, that's just an error.
Well, she's describing, Kurzweil is saying he recognizes that the human bodies will die, and including his, but so he's looking for a way to preserve his conscious individual awareness in some computer type.
Well, you might say the only level that would be transcendent would be the one that is above what you would call the subtle domain, but is at the level of the spiritual domain or the metaphysical. And then that is precisely the realization of that does transcend, but it isn't something that's going to be produced by some expansion of the rational.
So when Advaita Vedanta was describing Kurzweil's, I thought maybe she was describing a science fiction book initially, but she's saying, no, they really want to see this happen. They believe it can happen, believe it will happen, and they want to be contributing to it. But it's just a desire to attain some sort of immortality without acknowledging any higher order of reality, I guess, a higher order.
I guess you might say, if you no longer have God, you have to build one. And if you're going to try to build one, you can only use the tools that you're capable of dealing with, and those tools happen to be of this rational level, and of the level that you might say of the subtle domain.
I remember the expression, and I don't know who said it, about ghost in a machine. I bet Advaita Vedanta will know. But
Arthur Koestler.
That was who?
Arthur Koestler.
Arthur Koestler. And what was he using that description to describe? What was the? What was he referring to or alluding to?
I think he was referring to the soul and the body.
That the soul is like a ghost and the body is like a machine.
That's my understanding. Zeta Badria?
Well, I mean, that goes back to a much earlier concept, Deus ex machina.
Okay.
And so basically it's, I mean, I can't really say, what the concept means because it's been used in different ways throughout different times. I mean, I'm familiar with Kostler's view of things, but I would say that contrary to these people thinking that they can create God, that they think that, essentially we are machines, but we're also God. So they want to create the God from the machine, from us. So, if you think of like the concept in a novel or a movie, Deus ex machina, it's like there's an unsolvable problem and suddenly something is drawn out of a hat to fix the problem. And these people think that what they can do to solve all the problems is, since everything is a mechanism, is to create the ultimate mechanism, essentially the machine God.
Well, I think, this sounds very much like Teilhard de Chardin's theories of transcension. And I would defer to some of the other fakir that have dealt with Teilhard de Chardin's theories.
If it is based on his theories, which I'm not sure that it is, I would say it's an extreme perversion of them, because I think Desjardins would be horrified by what's happening right now. I think he's been vilified in the Tariqa completely unjustly, and though there may be errors in his metaphysic, I think he was fundamentally a well-intentioned priest.
Well, his intentions may, in his mind, have been well-intentioned, but I don't think they would agree that the results of them would be well in result.
I'm not sure. I don't know them that well, but when I've read some of the things by Teilhard, they make a certain amount of sense, and I think I'm with Zeta Badria. There are a lot of people who are maligned by the hard-shelled traditionalists. They don't like Teilhard. They don't like Jung. They don't like a lot of people who are trying to bring light to the world we live in. So I'm going to defer judgment on Teilhard until I read him again.
I just, one thing I realized over time is that sometimes by staunchly defending tradition, it actually plays into the hands of modernizers, in the sense that tradition always involved change. You cannot have any tradition without change. All traditions involved intercommunication with different groups of different religions, languages, and cultures. There was always adaptation. There was always evolution. There was always, adaptation to different scenarios, situations, environments, and so on and so forth. And so when you make some sort of idol out of the past, an idol out of tradition, it actually, on the one hand, alienates people that otherwise would be interested in spirituality. And it also plays into the hands of radical modernizers by creating this boogie goat, that this idol that they can just fight against. And it's silly. I mean, the fact is, yes, learn from the past and realize and criticize the mistakes we're making now, but also know that there's no going back on the path. End of story. We're in the present right now. We've got to push forward into the future, but you push forward into the future the way you think is best.
Yes, because things have changed, and there may be modern expressions that are more adequate to expressing these concepts than ancient expressions from an ancient world with ancient references.
I don't disagree with any of that.
Well, that's.
I don't know where that has anything to do with what I said, but at any rate.
Okay.
But does it answer the question? The question that she says is, how may we fight this? And that's the forces of unification and pushing toward a
Dark
diabolical singularity.
unification.
Yeah, how may we, that toward a diabolical, what kind of unification, you said?
Dark unification.
Yes, dark forces of unification. How may we fight this and help the party of life and plurality? I guess, do we have the answer?
Well, I don't know what to say other than one needs to affirm the truth.
Well, of course, there is the truth that Sufis speak of as the oneness of being and the realization of it.
Right.
Right. Is this something that needs to be revised? And if so, on whose authority?
Well, we could go on to the next question and just say that we don't know the answer to number one. Maybe we'll do better.
Wait a minute. Let's hear Seda Badria's answer to number one.
Yeah, how would you answer it?
I would say that we have to not just believe in the truth or fight for the truth, we have to live the truth. And I think the only way one individual can fight dark forces is by being a force of light. And if you have the opposite of dark unity, plurality, or if you have make yourself a force of the positive plurality, it's like two magnets repelling one another, and you can repel those dark forces. And there are ways of doing that simply by living the proper life, by living life fully. And one of the ways of fulfilling one's duty on this earth is by simply experiencing things to their absolute fullness. If one accepts the reality of this world, if one accepts one's mortality, and if one goes through that not with stoicism or sadness, but with the joy, knowing that it is how it was meant to be, then that itself is an example to others, and it's also a way of repelling these dark forces, whether they win or not in the end. Even if they build the ultimate machine brain, it doesn't really matter. In the end, there will be the big crunch, and they'll all be crunched up, and the people that are the forces of good can laugh on them as they burn in hell. But of course, because hell's not eternal, they'll only be there temporarily, a few billion years or so.
Yeah, it's what will seem like eternity, but
the last part, if you couldn't catch my sarcasm, was at least partially tongue-in-cheek, but I guess I didn't elicit the subtle laughter I was hoping for. At any rate, number two, Meister Eckhart claims God is fiery. Moses saw God as a burning bush. What is the meaning of this? Of the four primordial elements, is fire supreme?
Well, let's say it has a nature different than the others, and its nature, of course, is transformative. And so fire combines with each of the other elements in some way or another that is transformative. So the use of wine is an element in the Christian tradition, and this is my body and this is my blood. Wine is in fact a fiery element. It's a combination of the liquid element and the fire and the element of fire. That's why the Indians call it firewater.
Yes.
so the four elements are fire, earth,
Fire, and water.
In air.
and air.
Yeah.
I've never thought of one of those being somehow supreme. It just never occurred to me to say, well, which is the most supreme? And I've just always thought of those as, well.
In manifestation, it's impossible to find any one of those totally and completely in isolation. almost. I mean, every one of them is in fact reflective in some way or another of the others.
Yeah, we have
To a
stone.
lesser and greater degree.
Yeah, I was thinking of something like stone as being a form of earth, and yet stone, so much of it comes from volcanoes, which comes out hot and burning out of the earth.
Well, as far
Lava is obviously a combination of the earth and the fire
The
elements.
well, as far as our earthly survival, I would say air is supreme, because the fire can't go with it can't burn without air. We
Yeah.
certainly can't live without air.
Well, you might say
Water doesn't care.
it transforms air. Fire transforms air. It's transformative in its nature to some extent. So when fire burns something, it uses components of the air.
Right. It can't be fire without oxygen, which
Has
is
had the oxygen, yeah.
Well, oxygen can't be oxygen. I mean, you might say air can't be air without the combination in some way or another of the others.
right. You can have air without fire, though.
Well, you can't have any element without fire. If you look at the subatomic level, everything is burning.
Well, now wait a minute. What do we mean burning here?
I mean that there's a sort of elemental primordial fire underlying everything. It's the energy that lies beyond physical matter.
So we're calling all energy here fire?
It's to a certain extent, yes, but also I would say that the God beyond being is fiery. That the God, actual God, or the, what is generally referred to as God, could be considered, let's say, in different corporeal forms, but the God beyond being can best be symbolized in fiery terms.
No, I think it would be what is the fifth the pentic element. That is the one that is
the quintessential, the quintessence.
Yes.
Or ether, it's sometimes called. Is that the same thing? Quintessence and ether?
You've reduced the number of elements to 4, when in actuality there is the fifth, and that's the one that's supreme over all of the others. Now, then, to the question of Berta's about air, in the summer when the air is hot, the air is in fact accepting the fieriness of the sun. So you have a combination there. When the air is smoky, it's earth and air. When the air is dry, it is air without moisture. But when it is moist or humid, it is air with water. Okay, so you can't really find any of these 4 elements as being totally exclusive by itself.
The constituent elements of this world that we live in.
Right. Everything has its form, which inherits, you might say, aspects of the other elements, but it is predominantly one or the other. So the ocean is predominantly water, but nevertheless, it has salt dissolved in it, which is more predominantly earth.
So think about Moses at the burning bush. I guess the burning bush there is a symbol or a manifestation of God's presence.
Yes.
That Moses and perhaps others experienced as like fire, but they said it never consumed the bush. I mean, it was burning there, but the bush continued to survive. So it's not exactly fire in the ordinary sense.
He described it as burning. There we go.
I think it was God making his presence known in a transformative mode, like fire has with regard to the elements of the world. So God was transforming Moses and transforming. Yes.
You've got to change. You've got to do something different. I need you
That's right.
And didn't Moses take off his sandals? I mean, that somehow that notion that he couldn't.
He says that ground where God has come to talk to me and give me the commandments is holy, and I need to take off my sandals in order to step upon it. Because, and you know, we have the in Islam, of course, you have the same thing. You take off your sandals or your shoes to enter the holy area of the.
To go on a prayer rug. You don't wear shoes on a prayer rug.
And you purify it, and you use water to do the purification. So you are using elements, manifested elements, and so there's a certain aspect of water that carries with it a purity,
purification,
nature.
Well, and the ablutions too, are using water to purify yourself to be prepared to enter into the presence of God in prayer.
Yes.
So, Sayyidah Badria, you sometimes answer last before we move on. How would you answer the last question as far as the supreme?
Yes, fire is the supreme element because all other elements have their basis in fire. And the fire that we think of as fire isn't really fire, but just a pale shadow of the true fire. It's just a symbol representing what's at the actual fire that we can't see, but that pulses through all things, the primordial fire.
So are we ready for number 3?
Sure. Certain people seem to be more apt at talking about spiritual realities. Do you think some languages or cultures wire the brain in a way that make religion easier or harder for some rather than others?
I don't know that they wire the brain, but there are certain cultures that have, I think, language that's more useful and therefore more effective in describing spiritual realities.
And I think they correspond to the people involved and to whom the message is offered. So Islam is offered in the form of Arabic, and its prayers and rituals are performed in Arabic. In Christianity, there are choices, but I think the Sheikh said that the language that the scripture is quoted in has to be at least of noble level. So he accepted Latin and Greek as far as Christianity was concerned as being.
I might add that's a 20th century European view of what's noble.
Yes.
But
well,
go on.
I'll say that Aramaic, of course, is noble, but it is not commonly used. It is used in some churches in the Middle East.
Well, I'd step back even further and say the languages that are more spiritual and render the discussion, explication of spiritual principles better are the languages that are verb-based, not noun-based. Arabic is verb-based because, there are no nouns in the world really. And English is noun-based. So it's very difficult. You have to build conception upon conception to do things in English.
Well, you have a big dichotomy between what is inherited from the Germanic peoples and what is inherited from the Romans. So the Latin that's used for theology is usually verb-based, and Latin is very rich in its verb elaborations, whereas German is much more related to the names of things. Yes.
There was an interesting thing that I remember from a linguistics class in college, and they talked about the Native American. I don't remember whether it was a specific Native American language or Native American languages in general. It's been too long, but they were talking about that as we grow up as English speakers, a baby's first words are things like mama and dad or papa. whereas in the Native American languages, everything is based on movement and movement in relation to one or another. And a young child's first words might be things like walk and run. And I just found that very interesting. There's a constant argument among linguists is, does the brain make the language, or does the language make the brain?
Yeah, and if you look at the Chinese, their language is not phonetically related. It's figuratively expressed. So their thinking probably is very much in the order of form, geometric or whatever. So they can all read the same language, they can all read Chinese, but they can't all speak to each other because they have different dialects that they use. And so the Chinese are probably very, very mental. I mean, they would say a figure or a picture is worth 1,000 words, whereas we might say a word is worth 1,000 pictures.
Yes. Similarly, there's a American physicist by the name of David Peat, who makes the point that the reason quantum physics is so difficult to understand in English is that English is noun-based. And of course, there aren't any nouns. And he says if you approach quantum physics from the point of view of a verb-based language, and particularly his choice is an indigenous language, Blackfoot, one of the American Indian languages, things are much easier to describe and understand.
Huh. Well, how nice.
Yes. He has a book, Blackfoot Physics.
Really?
Yes.
Have you met him? Do you know him?
No, I've not met him, but I know him. He's one of the biographers of David Bohm. Where are we?
I found this fascinating.
Yeah.
Well,
the specific question is, do we think that some languages or cultures wire the brain or affect the way we think, I guess, and perceive in a way that may make religion easier or harder?
Well, I think we've said some languages make religion or religious spiritual concepts easier to express and understand.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's a matter of rewiring the brain, that's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Well, it may be that for someone whose background is of a people that have a certain language, and a religion that is delivered in that language would be more readily understandable to them than one that was delivered in some other language.
I think, if you look to certain places, you just really don't have many mystics. I mean, there's in the Anglo-American tradition, there's a rather paltry tradition of mysticism, but in the traditional sense, but it doesn't mean that it's, not there. It's just expressed in a different way. You've got the romantics and such, and I think nature mysticism is uniquely suited to the English language, because when you have a language based on so many adjectives and nouns, you can bring out the subtle dimensions of that which exists. On the other hand, of course, there are certain advantages, I suppose, in certain remarks to languages that lean more heavily on verbs. I'm just now paging through my comprehensive grammar of Italian, and the section on Italian verbs is longer than every other section of the grammar combined, which maybe says something. But I do think that different cultures socialize people in a way that makes different kinds of religiosity more or less palatable to those people raised in that society. It's not to say that the ultimate truths of religion are easier for some people or blocked from others, but that certain ways and means of expression are more open to some groups and closed to others. You're not going to find, let's say, Siberian shamans discoursing about the God beyond being. It's just not in the nature of the language or the culture. But on the other hand, you can ask yourself, is there really a need? Maybe the need for someone like Meister Eckhart only came around because of the early industrialization and larger groups of people living in cities and the rise of the burghers in the Germanic societies. The rise of Protestantism and everything else happened because of that. And so maybe we wouldn't have needed metaphysics as we privilege it if we were still living in a society with a bunch of shamans. I mean, why do you think the Greeks were the first to have comprehensive metaphysics? Well, it's because they had highly populous city-states. And so, as Simone Weil said, as great as the Greek metaphysics is, it already expressed a lack, because you only need metaphysics once you've already lost the ways of directly communicating about God.
Who did you just quote?
Simone Weil.
Well, I think, of course, you're lumping all of a certain level of understanding into the metaphysical. It's the metaphysical and the spiritual that belong at that plane. But at any rate, I don't know that the Greeks were the first to put together metaphysical expression, and they weren't any earlier than the Hindus. It seems to be something that is characteristic of a lot of people of their levels of understanding that they are capable of having. And it does seem to be the way that God communicates to man. It's the way he gives them, it's the way he brings forth the revelation of traditions. It's the way he expresses, you might say, truths that man is capable of receiving.
I would say that God makes his truths self-evident, and that there's already a book of nature prior to the advent of reading and prior to advent to the book. Go back before the South Asians and the Greeks to the ancient Egyptians, and even before then you have people that understood God, and I would say they understood God more profoundly and better than we do because they directly experienced things. For them, every leaf, every blade of grass, every time they looked at the sun, that was a manifestation of the divine. They didn't need to talk about it. They didn't need to make up metaphysical obfuscations, because it was already there in front of them.
That doesn't, because something is in front of you doesn't mean that you necessarily understand it. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't need to give it to someone who can bring that message to the people and help them understand it. For instance, the great peace giver of the Eastern Indians brought the message of the great peace and of the tree in the midst to them. And they recount all that he told them every year in their longhouse lodges. So you might say they didn't all come upon this just because they lived in nature. They came upon it because God told them what it meant.
One thought I had, we're running out of time here, but in some of these conversations, including today, have been references to people who are mystics, and I keep wondering, well, what exactly is a mystic? And maybe that could be formulated into a good question for
a mystic is someone who accepts the proposition that the divine can be known directly.
Yes.
Accepts the proposition or experiences that divine directly?
Experiences that.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
One might ask, how can you not? That makes you a kind of mystic.
Not everybody is a Master Eckhart. Not everybody is the ones who have been given things to express to man. Not everybody was a Saint Francis of Assisi. But nevertheless, there are men that God speaks to and gives to them the messages that they should propagate.
Yes, and there are many whom know God directly who are not expressing themselves, whose mission is not to express it to others.
Who's not there.
Yeah, that's true also.
Simply to know.
Yeah.
They're different things.
Yeah, in Sufism, they talk about the afrad, the hidden ones. They're mystics, but they're not preaching. They're not obvious to anybody. They're just people out on the street, and you'd look at them and
I'm sure that's the way it is and the way it always was.
I have a role in life that as soon as someone starts saying that they've directly experienced God, I say thank you very much and run in the opposite direction. Because in very many cases, those who claim that are actually claiming that for the wrong reasons, or they have some desire for power or some other thing. The fact of the matter is there's very many unknown, nameless, anonymous people that have directly experienced the divine realities and don't talk about it. And there are very few who have experienced those things, and they have talked or written about it, but they've only done so with trepidation. But when someone goes around saying, I'm supremely enlightened, I have pulled the truth, then you know for a fact that they don't hold the truth, because anyone who has been touched by the fire of the divine cannot help but be changed by that. And the first thing to burn away through the divine fires is narcissism. And if someone's so narcissistic that they say, I have the truth, well, then you know for a fact that that person doesn't have any truth.
Well, and that would apply to what you're telling us.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that to say that when someone says that, it means that it is false, is an assertion of a truth, which if someone says they believe that truth, you can say, well, that is false too. I mean, this is not you can disagree with either perspective. In fact, in the Gospels, it has both the example of one who should not hide his candle beneath a bushel, and it also has of one who should not speak what he knows.
Right.
To swine.
Both are possible.
Right. So those perspectives are both legitimate perspectives within the province of the tradition.
Yeah, we were saying a prophet is called to express himself to the people, and you can be skeptical, but that doesn't necessarily, and that may be healthy up to a point, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. They may be the real thing, the one, as we sometimes say, but most people who are viewed as the one are turned out not to be, many of them.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel.